The sun was burning high above the wide Arizona plain. Dust hung in the air, drifting from the wagon wheels that rolled down the rough trail. The wind carried the faint sound of rattling chains and the weak breath of a woman whose hands were tied behind her back. Her feet stumbled with every step, dragging in the dirt as the wagon moved forward. The men sitting on the wagon laughed from time to time, pretending not to see the pain in her face. They called her names she did not understand, and every cruel word seemed heavier than the chains on her wrists. Her name was Nita, an Apache woman whose small village had once stood between two hills of red rock. Her people were gone now, scattered or taken away, and she was the last one left from her family. Her eyes were dark and steady, but her body trembled from thirst and exhaustion. Still, she did not cry. She looked at the distant mountains and prayed silently for the strength to keep walking. Far away, near a stretch of land filled with grazing cattle, a man was repairing a broken fence. His name was Thomas Hale, a quiet rancher in his late 30s who lived alone since the loss of his wife years ago. He was a man who rarely spoke more than he needed to, a man whose eyes carried both kindness and a sadness that no one asked about. His horse stood nearby, flicking its tail, as Thomas hammered the final nail into the post. Then he heard it, something strange carried by the wind, a voice faint but desperate. He looked up and saw a cloud of dust moving slowly along the trail. Through the glare of the afternoon sun, he noticed the wagon, the men, and behind them, someone stumbling, half-dragged by chains. His heart tightened at the sight. He left his tools where they were and mounted his horse. As he rode closer, the laughter of the men reached him. Their wagon stopped for a moment when one of them jumped down to check the chains. The woman collapsed to her knees, her face pale with heat and fatigue. Thomas slowed his horse, watching carefully. He could see the cruel marks on her wrists, the way she was being treated as less than human. Something inside him stirred, a quiet anger, but deeper than rage. "Afternoon," Thomas said calmly as he rode up beside them. His voice was firm but polite. The men turned around, surprised by his sudden appearance. One of them, a big man with a red beard, grinned. "Ain't your concern, rancher. We're taking this savage to town. Sheriff will pay a few dollars for her." Thomas looked at the woman, then back at them. "She doesn't look like she can make it to town," he said slowly. "She'll make it," another man said, tightening the rope that held the chain to the wagon. "If she don't, we'll drag her till she does." Thomas's fingers tightened around the reins. He kept his face calm, but his voice grew lower. "Unchain her," he said. The men laughed. "You telling us what to do, rancher? You planning to fight three of us over some Apache woman?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He dismounted, his boots crunching in the dry dirt. "I'm telling you that no one deserves to be treated like that," he said quietly. The red-bearded man stepped forward, his face twisting with anger. But before he could speak, Thomas's hand moved faster than anyone expected. He didn't draw his gun. He simply pushed the man back with a solid force that made the others pause. His calmness scared them more than anger would have. Nita raised her head slightly, blinking at the stranger who stood between her and the men. She had seen cruelty before, but not a face that looked both strong and kind at once. "Take your wagon and go," Thomas said, still steady. "Leave her." The men hesitated. They didn't want trouble. They just wanted easy money. Something in the rancher's steady eyes made them step back. After a tense silence, one of them spat in the dirt and said, "She ain't worth it anyway. Keep her if you want." They unhooked the chain, letting it fall into the dust. Without another word, they climbed onto their wagon and rode off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the faint echo of wheels fading into the horizon. Thomas knelt beside the woman. "You're safe now," he said softly. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. Her lips moved, but no words came out. He poured some water from his canteen and held it out to her. She drank slowly, shaking from weakness. He helped her stand, supporting her with one arm. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded faintly, her voice a whisper that barely reached his ears. "Nita," she said, pointing to herself. He nodded. "I'm Thomas." They walked slowly toward his horse. He lifted her gently into the saddle, then walked beside it as he led the way back to his ranch. The road was quiet except for the sound of the wind brushing through the grass. Every few steps she looked back at the trail, half expecting the men to return, but they never did. By the time they reached his small wooden house near the creek, the sun was setting. The sky turned soft orange and pink, spreading warmth over the hills. Thomas helped her down and guided her to the porch. He brought a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Inside, he prepared warm soup and placed it before her without saying much. She ate slowly, her eyes watching every move he made, as if trying to understand why he helped her. When she finished, she whispered, "Why?" Thomas sat across from her, the firelight dancing on his face. "Because no one should have to beg for mercy," he said quietly. "Not out here." For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them felt peaceful. Outside, the crickets began to sing, and the sound of the creek flowed softly through the night air. Later, when she finally slept, Thomas sat by the window, staring at the dark outline of the hills. He couldn't shake the image of her walking in chains. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he knew one thing. Fate had brought her to his door for a reason. In the distance, a coyote howled under the moonlight. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his hat tilted low over his eyes, and whispered to himself, "She's safe now." But deep down, he also knew something had changed in him. The quiet rancher who once lived only for his cattle and land now felt a strange warmth inside his chest. It wasn't just pity, it was something stronger, something that made him feel alive again for the first time in years. And though Nita didn't yet know it, her rescue that day was only the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. The morning light came softly through the small cabin window. Nita woke to the smell of fresh bread and coffee. Her eyes opened slowly, unsure of where she was for a moment. Then she saw the simple wooden walls, the folded blanket over her, and the sound of boots outside on the porch. She remembered the rancher, the quiet man who had stopped the wagon, and a feeling of safety filled her heart. It was the first time in months that she had slept through the night without fear. Thomas was outside feeding his horse and checking the fence. The land stretched far and wide, covered in soft golden grass that shone under the early sun. When he came inside, he noticed her sitting up, still wrapped in the blanket. She looked cleaner now, though still weak. He gave a small smile. "Morning," he said simply. She nodded, whispering the same word back in a soft tone. He placed a plate of bread and a cup of milk on the table. "Eat," he said, his voice gentle. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled faintly and began to eat slowly. It was quiet between them, but it was a comfortable kind of silence. After breakfast, Thomas showed her the creek nearby so she could wash and feel fresh. He gave her one of his late wife's old dresses to wear, simple but clean. She looked at it with wonder in her eyes. When she stepped outside again, her hair wet from the creek and her face calm, Thomas almost didn't recognize her. The fear was gone from her expression, replaced by quiet strength. Days passed and the ranch grew warmer with life again. Nita began helping around the house. She swept the floor, washed dishes, and sometimes cooked using wild herbs she gathered near the creek. She didn't speak much English, but she watched and learned quickly. Thomas tried to teach her simple words: water, bread, horse, sun, and she laughed softly each time she got one wrong. Her laughter was light and kind, something the old house hadn't heard in a long time. Every evening they would sit on the porch together. Thomas would fix tools or polish his boots while Nita watched the sky turn red over the hills. One evening she pointed toward the sunset and said, "Beautiful." Thomas smiled and nodded. "Yes, beautiful." She looked at him then, and for a moment their eyes met. Something gentle passed between them, something neither could explain in words. As the weeks went by, people from the nearby town started to notice that the quiet rancher had company. Some didn't like it. A few men at the saloon whispered about how he had brought an Apache woman to live with him. They said it was shameful, dangerous, or foolish. But Thomas didn't care. He had seen enough cruelty to know what mattered. One afternoon, while Thomas was in town buying supplies, two men from the wagon, the same ones who had chained Nita, appeared near the ranch. They had heard rumors that the woman they left was still alive and living with the rancher. They came with greedy thoughts, hoping to take her again and sell her elsewhere. Nita was hanging clothes by the creek when she heard the distant sound of horses. Her heart raced as she turned and saw the men. They called out to her, grinning like wolves. Fear froze her legs for a second, but she remembered Thomas's words. "No one can hurt you here." She ran toward the cabin as fast as she could. Thomas saw the dust on the road as he rode back. His heart dropped. He knew trouble when he saw it. He pushed his horse faster, the wind rushing past his face. When he reached the ranch, he found Nita standing on the porch, clutching one of his coats for comfort. The two men were there looking smug. "Rancher," one of them said with a sly grin. "We changed our mind. We'll take her back now. You had your fun long enough." Thomas got off his horse slowly. "She's not yours," he said, his tone steady but cold. They laughed. "She ain't yours either." Thomas took a step closer. "She's free. You come here again, you'll regret it." The men sneered and moved forward, but something in Thomas's calm, fearless eyes stopped them. They remembered how he had faced them before. One of them muttered a curse and pulled his reins. "Keep your savage then," he said bitterly. "You'll regret it." They rode off, their laughter fading in the distance. Nita stood there, shaking, but when Thomas turned to her, she took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you." Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of relief. He gently touched her shoulder. "No one will hurt you," he said softly. "Not while I'm here." That night the stars seemed brighter than ever. The ranch felt alive again, full of something warm and safe. Nita sat by the fire humming an old Apache song. Thomas listened quietly, leaning back in his chair. He didn't understand the words, but the melody touched something deep inside him. As days turned into months, their bond grew stronger. Nita helped Thomas with the cattle, learning how to ride and care for the animals. He taught her to plant corn and fix fences, while she taught him small things about the forest, how to read tracks, how to listen to the wind. They didn't need many words to understand each other anymore. One spring morning, Thomas rode out to the hills with her to find a missing calf. The sun was shining and the air smelled fresh after rain. They found the calf near a fallen tree trapped in some brush. Together they freed it, laughing as the small creature ran back toward the herd. When they looked at each other, both smiling, something passed between them that neither could ignore anymore. That evening, as they sat by the porch, Thomas spoke after a long silence. "You've made this place feel alive again," he said softly. Nita looked at him confused. "Alive?" she repeated. He nodded. "Yes, you make it feel like home," she smiled shyly. "Home," she said, touching her chest. "My home." From that day on, they were no longer two lost souls sharing a roof. They became family in their own quiet way. The neighbors who once gossiped stopped talking when they saw how peaceful the ranch had become. The man who once lived in silence now laughed in the evenings, and the woman who once walked in chains now walked free under the open sky. Seasons passed, and the land bloomed with life. Thomas built a small garden for her near the creek, filled with wildflowers and herbs. Nita would hum softly as she worked there, her long hair shining in the sunlight. Sometimes travelers passing by would stop and ask if the ranch ahead was Hale's place and the one with the kind man and the gentle woman who helped strangers along the road. Thomas never told them the full story. He didn't speak of the chains or the day he first saw her being dragged in the dust. He only said she came here tired and left her pain behind. Years later, when storms came and the world grew harder, people would still say that there was something special about that small ranch by the creek. They said the man who lived there had a quiet strength, and the woman beside him had a heart strong enough to heal anything broken. And though their beginning had been born from cruelty, their life together became a tale of quiet love and courage, proof that even in the roughest corners of the Wild West, kindness could still bloom.